Okay. So it is now 7 p.m., September 20th, 2018. So I'm going to call to order a meeting of the Substandard Living Conditions Special Committee. Clerk, could you please call attendance?
Alderman Tom Lopez, Chairman.
Is here.
Members of the committee, Alderman at Large Brandon Michael Laws. Here. Alderman Jan Smith. Absent. And Alderman Linda Harriet Gathright, present.
And then Alderman Ernest Jetty as well is not in attendance. Both Alderman Schmidt and Alderman Jetty said they had conflicting meetings. We had to reschedule this meeting from last week, so it was a little short notice.
Hi, this is Linda, who's on the phone.
Hi, it's Tia Phillips from Clock Tower Place.
So also joining us is Tia Phillips from Clock Tower Place and Roger Boyard. Is that pronunciation right? Thank you. And they'll be discussing, we'll be having a discussion on, common challenges that building managers face, what their best practices, what their strategies are, all that kind of stuff. So, Roger, if you want to join us in the horseshoe here. Tia, just as a point of protocol, can I ask if you are currently alone or if there's anybody with you on your side of the phone?
Oh, I'm currently alone.
Okay, thank you. So, a little bit of background for the committee. The Substandard Living Conditions Special Committee basically addresses any legislation meant to respond to any substandard living conditions that are present in the city. Typically, our city is pretty well run. We have a lot of landlords that do a good job every night. People go to bed happy. But there's some where people are suffering either because there's lack of resources, lack of knowledge, lack of communication, whatever the circumstances may be. So we meet periodically to discuss issues and make sure that the committee is educated and the public has a venue with which to bring issues to our attention. There are no pieces of legislation on our agenda tonight. In our previous meeting, also joining us is Alderman at Large, Lori Wilshire, also Vice President. So in our previous discussions, we had presentations from the Board of Health regarding, a regional/national bed bug epidemic. We had some people coming and making public comment on the issue. We had New Hampshire legal assistance. To that end, the Soup Kitchen is continuing that. They're going to be hosting the New Hampshire legal assistance on September 27th at 11 a.m. to noon. But we thought that this month we would be focusing more on challenges that building managers face and best practices, so that we're not overly focusing on things that are going wrong and maybe talking about strategies and best practices. So I invited Roger, who manages multiple properties on Main Street, and Tia, who is the building manager for Clock Tower. Actually, I think I'll let them describe themselves. So Roger, do you want to give us a quick little, in a nutshell, what your role is?
Yeah, I'm basically a property manager for different owners for different buildings on Main Street and on East Pearl Street, mostly commercial, but there are many of the residential also. And I'm also a live-in manager at 184 Main Street. We have 28 apartments there. So that's always a challenge. But
Being available 24/7.
Yeah, 24/7, yeah. I mean, we've had an incident where an elderly man just was with dementia and knocking on my door at 1 o'clock in the morning and trying to get him help. It was a challenge. We ended up having to go to court. So sometimes you run into situations like this where you just don't know what to do, and who do you turn to? Who do you call?
And Tia, do you want to give us a quick introduction of your role?
Sure. My name's Tia Phillips. I am the senior property manager over at Clock Tower Place. There are 326 apartment homes there. I've been there for 20 years. I'm also the current president of the Apartment Association of New Hampshire.
You're also featured on one of the Lego heads on the Oval.
Yeah.
That's the claim to fame. So, Roger, if you want to just maybe start us out on not necessarily the unique experiences, but what are the kind of day-to-day roles that building managers generally do to maintain their buildings or
Well, you never know what you're going to end up with as far as a broken pipe from these old buildings. You get a lot of broken pipes sometimes and just leak through the apartment, through the floors, and you have to be able to respond to that immediately. Sometimes you end up shutting the water off for the entire building, which inconveniences everyone. You can't let them know at the time. I mean, you just have to deal with the emergency. Right now, I'm dealing with an asbestos problem on East Pearl Street, and people were using areas for the storage, and so now I have to vacate that basement and seal it off so that people are protected from that. That can be a problem, because that can end up being a hardship for the owner when it costs $9,000 to, abate it. So those are some of the issues that I deal with all the time.
Does environmental health provide any kind of guidance with how to deal with asbestos or anything that you would recommend?
Yeah, I haven't actually talked to them at all. This had actually went through the Board of Health, Ren.
Yeah,
came over-
that's environmental health.
Yeah. Oh, is it? Oh, okay, because he was down there because what we had was a hoarder, and we were concerned about, just too much stuff in the apartment and things of that nature, and she was also using the basement, and she wasn't supposed to be using the basement at all. And so when he went down there, that's when he noticed the asbestos. So now I'm taking it a step at a time on the proper way of doing that,
So there's certainly a voyage of discovery where you have tenants you're expecting to just rent out to them, and then suddenly they have more stuff, they need more storage, they have more storage in an area that wasn't really being used, and suddenly you discover that there needs to be some kind of update or maintenance to it.
Well, I think these are actual hoarders. I mean, you can give them the biggest space that you want, and they're still going to just fill it up, So it has to be on the lease as far as, we have a right to inspect the apartment on occasion to make sure that they are not, that everything's clear. I mean, I have one tenant that was just so packed. I mean, if he were to have a heart attack and he was a large man, I don't know how they get to him.
So there is
Going
a
in-
safety concern too. Landlords
Oh,
should be
absolutely.
inspecting the units to make sure that there's fire access and egress. And
Right.
Tia, do you have any similar experiences or input on?
Absolutely. We do, over at Clock Tower, we do inspections of every apartment annually with notice. And during the inspections, we're just generally looking for, to make sure that residents are calling in routine work orders that could, if left unattended, cause substantial damage. You have, with the different kinds of residents that we have those that are very good about calling in work orders and maintenance requests, which we appreciate. And then you have the other segment that may not. For instance, if residents do not call in, we have tile showers. If they don't call in, general work orders for regrouting and caulking, that can turn into a big mess, leaking downstairs, much worse. But during those apartment inspections, we are also looking for egress issues. We have in the past occasionally had to call on the fire department to help us with those issues as far as what they're able, what is acceptable, how wide does the lane have to be from the door to the window, et cetera.
Being a larger site too, and I stayed both in Clock Tower and at places managed by Roger. Tia, you have an online portal for clients, for residents to submit work orders that kind of gives you a little bit more detail and information?
We have an online portal that it's part of our active building portal. I'm not sure that we had that when you were lived at Clock Tower, Tom, but we have
It was coming out.
Like in building Facebook kind of thing where you can report or work orders right online. And we also have a 24-hour emergency line for after the management office is closed. There's always someone on call.
Now, that's your own internal staff, or do you outsource that or use someone with a contract? Or?
It's all of our internal staff. That rotation is shared by 6 different employees from 3 different sites. So it's more than Clock Tower staff. It's Clock Tower is managed by Wingate Management, so there are multiple sites close by, and 6 individuals share that on-call rotation. So every 6 weeks, the guys are on call.
So you have friends and you can share the load.
Exactly.
And then Roger, I'm guessing from the knock on your door, you don't have the same scenario. So
No,
there's
actually,
different
I like
scales
the idea of being able to go online and saying that, you know. But usually they come through me, and I have a window list that I plug it into, and everyone gets it. My maintenance guy, the office, all gets it. And that's been very useful.
Right. And I was just thinking, like, if you have to outsource, like, call a plumber or the handyman or whatever, having the person who knows about the problem document it and then send it means all you have to do is make sure it gets there instead of having to be interviewing them, figuring out what's going on, passing it on. I mean, is that something that you think landlords should be doing, or do you recommend more the go in person, have somebody nearby who can check out the scope of the problem?
Oh, no, if it's something that sounds serious, we call right away. Either Chuck will come down, or I'll call the proper person, whether it be a plumber or whatever, you know. But usually I check it out right away.
And you have records of like the repairs or issues that are happening per tenant, I would imagine?
That'd be kept at the office, so Shayla would take care of something like that.
Okay, so there's an upward office for your sites
Right,
too.
right. So I don't handle that. They try to make my job as easy as possible.
I guess the missing piece I would have liked to have had here was a presenter who's like just managing 1 or 2 units, just so you get like the full scope. Because I imagine as much as we have larger scale landlords managing multiple units, there's also smaller scale individual ones. And so what I'm hearing from both Tia and Roger as a common thread is having very regular inspections is a good thing for things, what would you say, like environmental health, fire safety?
Well, everything, I mean, because of, you know, that was built in 1939, that building. So it's not uncommon for us to want to do an inspection twice a year to check the electrical and especially the plumbing. If we can prevent a leak before it happens, you know.
You save a lot of property damage, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's worth doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the tenants are great. They understand.
What about handicap accessibility? I know from being on the housing authority, the elevator goes down, it has to be fixed, but it's also extremely expensive.
Yeah, it is. I mean, again, the elevator's old. It has been gone down, and we weren't able to get parts for sometimes for 3 or 4 days, and that can be a hardship for someone who's handicapped. Fortunately, we don't have anyone in a wheelchair, but we do have, you know, a lot of larger, overweight people. That's very hard for them to climb stairs, you know. But usually we give them, if we can, if we know the problem, like if they're out of the building, we'll give them a call to let them know that the elevator's down, and I'll give you a call when it's back up.
And I know Clock Tower has multiple elevators per building, right, Tia?
We do, and it's a little different when you're, you know, a larger facility like Clock Tower. We do have all of our contractors generally on a PM contract, and right now our elevators are include emergency service. So, and I understand that smaller landlords probably don't have that ability. So.
Well, and that might be where the landlord wants to be cautious about the expectations they're setting for people coming in, while at the same time not discriminating against someone with, you know, special
Exactly
needs.
right.
Yeah.
So do you guys have any recommended, who do you think everyone should know about and have a person who's an expert on? I know bed bugs obviously came up, so an exterminator company.
Yeah, we use JP Pest, and they've been good. And we've had several, you know, incidences of bed bugs. And usually they're pretty easy to get rid of. This last time was actually in my apartment, which, you know, I was ready to move out. I'll tell you. and it was very difficult because what was happening, see, a bed bug will not normally travel if there's a person in the room and they've got food. So usually it's contained within that one apartment. But in this particular case, the person had passed away. We didn't know about it, and it was traveling out and going into my apartment. And we just had a real tough time getting rid of them.
Oh, so there's a surprise for landlords. You had somebody pass away and then How did that get discovered?
The guy usually goes to the club, and he wasn't showing up, and after 3 or 4 days, they called somebody, and they came to check on him. That's how we found him. Otherwise, it's, not like, I try to keep a conscious, because it's not a huge place. I got 28 apartments, so if I don't see someone for a while, sometimes it'll click on me to say, gee, I wonder where he is or she is, and I go check on them. But sometimes you just get busy, and you don't think about it. Next thing you know, they've been dead in the apartment for 4 days.
I have unfortunately had similar experiences, so
Yeah.
I can understand how awkward it is. So maybe a good suggestion for landlords who might be concerned about that. Obviously, you mentioned the social interaction part of it, but also if something's unusual with a tenant, feel free to do a wellness check, make a phone call. If you're not hearing from them, maybe see if you can,
Right.
have someone stop by.
Right.
Tia, you have a neighborhood interaction portal, like a social gathering and events and those kind of things?
We do, and we have, like I said, it's very similar to like a Facebook where you can post, or you're posting that you're having a party. We can email everybody in the community, and we do have our residents that are that tend to make friends on a floor or something like that. I do think it's important for people, if you don't see someone, to say something and reach out. I was also going to just mention quickly, we use PestN for our bed bugs, and we have started doing, because bed bugs were such a problem, probably I want to say a year and a half ago at Clock Tower. We have started pre-inspecting. We have PestN come and pre-inspect the apartments before people move in. So that when people move in, we're able to certify that the apartment is free of pests, including bed bugs.
That's
Well,
good to be proactive.
what about, do you inspect the stuff that they're bringing in? Because that's how they're bringing them in, and mattresses and their
Right. Well, by pre-inspecting and having PestN certify that the unit is bed bug free, then if they bring in things on their own moving in, then they're responsible for getting rid of the bed bugs.
Ah,
Because you've already certified that the unit is bed bug free. And we just started doing that, I want to say beginning of this year, because, it's extremely expensive. And we found the best way to treat bed bugs is through heat treatment, which runs about $1,400 per unit
Right.
in a standard 2-bedroom. And I was also going to mention the absolute worst is earlier this year, was it this year? Yeah, earlier this year, I had the worst of the worst, which is a hoarder with bed bugs. An elderly hoarder with bed bugs.
Ooh.
So she couldn't clean out her stuff herself, and we had to get social services involved to make arrangements for a specialist to come in to help her sort through her things. There was a whole court-ordered agreement that we had to do, and
It
we
can
got
be
rid of
very
them now.
difficult.
Yay!
now who do you use for pest control?
We use PestN.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I will say that was referenced by public health, that when a treatment company comes in and makes recommendations for how to prepare for treatment, a lot of the areas where people can't comply necessarily is if they have too much furniture, too many things. So that some of the recommendations maybe get rid of the things that are likely infested, and people won't let go of it. People, it's difficult if you need whatever it is. You don't want to get rid of your favorite couch or whatever. But it's also equally problematic if you get rid of it by taking it out of your apartment and leave it in the hallway. So making sure your buildings are clear of quote, free furniture and that kind of stuff particularly is probably a good general rule of thumb.
Anytime we get a situation like that, we wrap any furniture completely in plastic. Now, if the tenant wants to save the couch, for instance, then they'll have to pay the $800 to put it in a truck for the heat treatment.
So there's a truck that heat
They
treats?
bring, their big van, and they can throw it in there, and they heat the furniture up.
Oh,
But
geez.
usually it's not worth $800. I mean, may as well buy
Yeah.
a new one.
Those are all good
So-
resources to know, though.
Yeah.
Chairman, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by this pre-inspection for bed bugs thing. I think it's a great idea. I can imagine it's probably exponentially, this is Alderman Laws, by the way, sorry. It's probably exponentially cheaper to pre-inspect, and then it absolves you of the financial responsibility in case I get bed bugs, right? So this should be like
Correct.
common practice for most people, especially who are running large multi-unit buildings, correct?
I believe, so my facilities manager, Scott Rogers, used to work at Canover, and I believe they do the same thing. And he suggested it when he came to Clock Tower, and we have adopted that practice. We haven't run into a situation yet where someone that we've pre-inspected has contracted bed bugs. So, but I do think it's a great way to shield yourself from that unanticipated expense. It's a little easier for us at Clock Tower because, again, we have the building being so large on the river and it's a big mill. We have a PM maintenance contract with Pest End where they just come every Thursday and they're just treating something. There's trash rooms and basements and laundry rooms, and if anybody has any issues in their apartment, they'll go in and treat them. So when they're there every Thursday, we just have them certify whatever vacant units that we're turning over.
We
the
have been
tech-
paying a
it's
lot of
signed off-
attention to bed bugs as a nuisance, but I mean, other pests like a cricket in your apartment somewhere is a pain in the butt. You never know where it is.
Right. Exactly. So anybody that puts any work orders for spiders spiders are our favorite because we're right on the river.
Mhm.
But it seems to be pretty easy for us, and jury's kind of out as to how it's actually going to work when somebody has bed bugs, because I haven't come across that yet. Someone that's been pre-inspected now has bed bugs. They would pay the cost. So.
Does any other members of the committee have questions, or?
I have more questions.
Oh, go for it, Alderman Loss. The floor is
Uh,
yours.
Legally, how often, is there any legal writing saying how often you can inspect an apartment that you own?
Well, we, of course, for any emergency, we have a right of entry, with or without notification.
course.
If there's a broken water coming down, we have a right to go right in there anytime. But no, there's nothing that says that we can only do it twice a year. There's no restrictions per se, but. I
So you can
mean,
do it if you suspect that someone might be a hoarder. The hoarder thing kind of resonates with me. One of my
Well, I hate going into other people's apartment anyways.
I can imagine.
So unless I get, unless there's justification, I won't go in. Yeah. But no, I mean, a yearly inspection is certainly not, expected. You'd expect it. But a bi-yearly one, I think, is reasonable also.
All right.
But usually when we find a hoarder and the apartment's in bad shape and stuff like that, we'll send a notice out to them that they have 30 days to clean it up or we're gonna pursue eviction.
There was a a fire on Franklin Street, I believe in January, where one of my best friends, who happens to be a national police officer, and two of his colleagues all almost died because they went into a house that was on fire, couldn't find the way to get to the person who was inside, and ended up having to clear a path, had to clear a path for the Nashville Fire Department to come in and rescue the person. So the hoarding thing is definitely, especially in a multi-unit building, I feel like that's probably one of the largest concerns.
It can be difficult for older or disabled residents as well, because they may have difficulty physically moving things out of the unit, whereas bringing things in, one or two things at a time, can be done. Suddenly you're trying to clean up and, you just can't do it. So
Right.
that's, again, where having a lot of communication with your residents, making sure your residents are all collectively neighbors and neighborly, maybe these problems solve themselves a little bit with more people around to help out their neighbors.
I mean, I had one tenant, a good friend of mine, and she was a hoarder, and I rented her an office space just for storage, and she filled that room and started filling up her apartment again. Now she has two places that is, packed.
It's not getting better.
So that's not really a solution, to give her more space.
Yeah,
It's just the nature of what,
it's like giving an alcoholic more alcohol.
yeah,
No?
Do you have any more questions, Alderman Laws?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, what happens if you're doing an inspection and you stumble across, someone's growing a marijuana plant in their apartment, or they've got something worse, something illegal.
Needles or
Sorry?
Myself, I
needles or they're
let the
doing a
office
line.
handle it and let the legal department handle it. I wouldn't touch that at all,
Yeah. Do you know?
I would report it, but that's about it.
All right.
So once upon a time, this is probably several years back, during an apartment inspection, we found a large cache of weapons that included what appeared to be grenades. And I reported it to and I called the resident and I said, "What's up with all the stuff in your apartment? Are those live grenades?" And he's like, "Yeah, the police know about it, and you feel free to call them." And I said, "Thank you, I will." And I called the police, and like 20 minutes later, the SWAT team was at the building. Did not know about it.
How do you remember to put that in the lease? Like no explosives?
Yeah,
Yeah, no explosive.
I mean, having one thing, the right to bear arms is one thing, but like things that could be dangerous for the whole residence.
yeah, right.
Absolutely, and I think it's important to, when you're doing an inspection, to look for things that are dangerous like that. You just never know, these days. But yes, if someone's as far as the illegal activity, if someone has a grow house or anything, I haven't come across that yet. But we find illegal pets and stuff like that, and then we do follow up with a breach of lease or follow up if necessary with legal action.
Well, thank you.
And there's always the opportunity for residents to, if they know something's going on, to call the police too, especially with things like domestic violence. I mean, maybe people are just loud talkers and like to move furniture around and all that, but if you hear something going on, it's probably safer to just have the police stop by and check in and make sure everyone's all right than just listen to it and assume that it'll de-escalate itself or whatever. I think neighbors can also be a major ally if the landlords maintain a good rapport with all of them. I'm personally very much in favor of, like, when you have multiple people living on a floor, encouraging the sense of community, because a lot of the problems that happen to people happen because they didn't have somebody to turn to when it was happening. So if they have people around them that can help or offer advice, it just bolsters your ability as a landlord to meet their needs, because sometimes they need a plumber and sometimes they just need a guy with a step ladder to change a light bulb. So those are things sometimes neighbors can help each other with.
Sometimes they need to ask for help and they just don't have anybody who's willing to ask for them,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Really don't know
All right.
what
Well,
else.
if there aren't any more questions from the other members,
I might have
oh, I think Alderman Wilshire has a
I
question.
was here just really listening, because, bed bugs are a big issue. Affordable housing is a big issue. Affordability, it's a lot for a landlord, as you know, to remediate bed bugs, and they seem to be getting more and more resistant to the
Yes.
treatments,
There you
right?
go.
They're getting tougher, and they're harder to get rid of. First you had just the spray and the whatever, then you had the dog, and now you have the heat, and they're just getting more and more resistant, and they're not going away. They're not going away anytime soon. And,
Nope.
a place as big as Clock Tower, I mean, that's got to be an enormous bill every month, and it's hard to keep good tenants if that's happening. So thank you, Tia, for keeping up with that, and to you also, because it is a big issue out there right now.
Yeah, when we get them, it's like, oh, no, not again. And she's right.
It's like not compassion fatigue, it's pest fatigue.
Yeah, but heat treatment, again, is the most effective way. It's just the most, but in a clean apartment. I mean,
Yeah.
the heat has to be able to penetrate everything in that apartment.
You can't heat treat the one with the grenades.
And it can't be overstuffed. Like if there's too many goods in the apartment, they can't heat it up hot enough to kill the bed bugs.
Right. Right.
When people do have bed bugs, they come to us, it kind of goes back to wrapping the couches and things. We really make it a point. We kind of give them the speech that says, okay, you have bed bugs, and we know and that your initial reaction is you want to throw everything away. But in order to throw things away at Clock Tower, you have to go to the common shared trash chute down the hall. So we tell them, you please consider yourself quarantined, and we don't want you to throw anything away until after the treatment. And if you absolutely have to throw something away, you need to contact the office so we can help you do that. because the last thing we want is people carrying their stuff down the hall to get rid of it, or to the washing machines, and dragging all the stuff down the hall, and so we
And
have a
they're going
little
out into the
prep
apartments.
sheet with a little it's sort of a to-do list that they have to prep for treatment, but it also tells them what not to do to isolate the infestation.
I've seen it pretty commonly recommended that you dry all of your clothes on high, which is, you put them in a garbage bag, you bring them down to your laundry room, you put them in the dryer and you heat them, throw the garbage bag out and get another one, because then you're putting them back into the bag they came from. So there's a lot of little things like that where the directions
Yeah.
for the residents, they should be looking at those carefully and just following them to the letter.
We usually have
Mhm.
a sheet we give them with all the
And
instructions.
most pest companies have sheets that if you have a problem, they can help you educate the resident to go through the process.
I mean, if anybody feels like a mini capital investment, for about $200, you can get like a tent, basically, a mini tent that has a heater on it that you can just cook things in. So I don't know if that's of use to anyone who might have these issues pop up every now and then, but it's just food for thought. That way you don't have to bring things out of the unit. You can just nuke things that are in there and reduce the overall liability. The worst thing about bed bugs is you never know exactly like how many you have. You could have like half a dozen and they just keep showing up. You have to treat the entire area because you don't know where they are.
And you also,
And to that point, if someone, say, in an apartment on a floor has bed bugs, once we treat that unit, we also inspect like in a cross, and we have the pest end people go in above, side, and below
So you
Right.
think about it as a 3D problem.
to
Right.
make sure that hasn't spread.
yeah, you got to check all the adjacent units.
What about parking? How do you guys, do you find that maybe more tenants will move into a unit than you expected and they'll get an extra car and you won't, how do you manage those kind of things? Roger?
Well, they're only allowed one sticker per apartment.
Mm-hmm.
So if they have more than one car, they'll have to rent from the city and use the garage. Because technically, we got 28 apartments and 26 parking spots, so
Someone can't have them.
fortunately, a few don't drive,
And then Tia, I know Clock Tower not only has the back parking lot and the front parking lot, but also an underground one.
We do, and the way we currently don't have a limit on the number of vehicles that an apartment can have, but in order to have all of the cars on the lot after 9 p.m. have to have a parking sticker, a resident parking sticker. And in order to get a resident parking sticker, you have to be an authorized occupant. So that helps us make sure that people aren't. We're trying to control people letting people into the community that haven't had a criminal background check. So, in order to get a parking sticker, you need to go through the system and be screened.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you park on the lot after 9 o'clock without a sticker, you'll get towed. We're not responsible for any towing fees. We also have an underground parking garage, which is currently it's $50 a month for an assigned space, and it's a 12-month membership.
The surface lots have to be vacated for snow removal or something along those lines?
Correct. On the surface lot, if we say we're removing snow, you have to move your car on one side between 8 and noon, and the other side between noon and 4. And if you don't move your car, we'll help you move it. So I'm hooking it up to a tow truck, and moving it for you.
How kind.
Okay, right?
We'll call you in advance and remind you through our automated system.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to call you first and remind you to move your car.
Well, it brings up a point, though, as far as winter and snow, because my tenants have no place to go. And I encourage them to use the city garages to get it out of our lot, because we got no place to put the snow otherwise, you know? And
Yeah.
the problem is that it's still in a pay mode in the garage, and they don't want to pay because they haven't declared a snow emergency, which they won't until after the stores close, you know?
Well, and the garages get pretty like competitive when there is a snow emergency
Yeah.
because people from the surrounding streets are putting them in there. There's your regular leased tenants too. So,
Yeah.
as much as there's a lot of capacity for recreational use, when there's a snow emergency, it gets pretty dicey in there.
I think that snow is difficult as far as clearing a lot. It's just difficult for any property here in Boston. Everybody's got to move their cars. And although it seems like that's, as a landlord, everyone's like, you tow my car. No, we have a job to do to keep the property liability free from mounds and mounds of melting snow. And as long as your lot clearing policy seems reasonable, and you're notifying people in advance, it's very difficult at Clock Tower because there's really nowhere to put the snow, and all the cars have to move all at one time in order for the plow to go down and clear all the snow. Otherwise, we have melting piles of yuck everywhere.
Well, we appreciate that you don't just push it in the river. All right. So again, if there's any more questions, I'd like to thank Roger and Tia for both coming and discussing this issue with us today. We appreciate your time and the work you guys put into maintaining your properties in such a positive manner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Spelling of Roger's last name.
Roger, can you spell your name real quick? You want to spell your name for our
Last
clerk?
name. Last name.
We do have a
Hi,
communication that we
Roger.
received as well.
Bollard, Boilard.
Boilard.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
How's that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tia.
All right.
So our next order of business is public comment. I do not see any other members of the public here. And then, we may have actually, we probably should have done that before the discussion, but there was no members of the public present. And then communications. We received an email last week regarding Sullivan Terrace, 56 Tyler Street, apartment 606. It was forwarded to the board, the members of the committee, and it's attached to the agenda here. But I also redirected it back to the Housing Commission because I feel like that's a more legitimate venue for it to be aired. So can I get a motion to accept and place it on file? Alderman Laws?
So moved.
All right, there being no objection, we will keep it on file. Now, remarks by members or board of the Aldermen? Anyone have any remarks to make? I would like to offer my condolences to the family, friends, and community of Andrew Smith. He passed away very recently. I knew him from the Cultural Connections Committee and his work with the Disproportionate Minority Contact Program. And I just wanted to make sure that he was commented on because he made it known that he wanted to change the world. And Andrew was somebody who, for our city, did a lot. He really helped facilitate a positive approach on the part of youth to law enforcement, making sure that trainings and discussions were had with how to interact with police and how to be respectful and polite with them, and then vice versa. He really encouraged, reminding police officers these are teenagers, they're kids, they're going to act a little bit different, and he encouraged them to interact with each other. He created a project called the Mirror Project, where they would cooperatively work to develop a training video where kids could see this video. It would be kids that they knew from school, maybe their older brothers. They would see police officers around town, and it was the same kind of like what to do when you meet the police or how to treat them, but it was relevant to people in the community because they knew people in it and they saw those officers around. And it was just one of many things that he really did that I think make our community a better place. the Cultural Connections Committee, the My Brother's Keeper, the Welcoming City. A lot of these things track back to how does law enforcement and the community interact with each other, and Andrew is a great champion for that. So I just wanted to remark on that. Alderman Cathright.
Same for me. Just want to be with the family, just keep in prayer the family. And his funeral is tomorrow morning at 10:30 at New Fellowship Baptist Church at 50 Ash Street, which is next door to the PAL Center.
All right. If there's no further comments from the members of the Board of Aldermen, I guess I will take a motion to adjourn. From Alderman Laws. All right, we are adjourned at 7:40.
Again, sorry about your friend. He sounds like a great guy.
Really? Oops. Two screens.